both Elijah and Peter experience something just incredible, and they have different responses. Elijah, in the previous chapter of 1 Kings, he has a confrontation with the priests of Baal, and they are all wiped out. He says, you build an altar and a sacrifice, I'll build an altar and a sacrifice. We'll see which one God accepts by calling down fire. And Elijah builds an altar, he makes the sacrifice on it, and it is consumed in fire. And he runs out into the desert. He's exhausted. He just wants to give up. And he's given bread and water and then told to walk 40 days to the mountain of God. When he gets to the mountain of God, God says, why are you here? And he says, this happens 3 times in the story. He says, I'm the only one left. Everybody's gone. I just want to give up. And so God calls him to the top of the mountain. And when he gets to the top of the mountain, he's in this cave. And the Lord says, I'm going to be passing by. And so we have the strong wind, which is rending the mountain, crushing the rocks. We have an earthquake, and we have a fire, but God is in none of these. God is in this gentle breeze, or this whispering sound. And then Elijah covers his face, because you can't go into God's presence and live. Peter, he has just experienced Jesus multiplying food for thousands. This is incredible. People have multiplied food before, but never anything. This is like 100 times more than anybody else has ever done. And so the disciples, they're astounded by this. And Jesus sends them off in the boat. And they must have been talking about this, and maybe they were excited, maybe they were in awe. But then the weather starts getting bad, and they see Jesus walking on the water. Nobody walks on the water except God. Elijah didn't walk on the water. He could part the water, but he had to walk on dry land. Moses, he could part the water, but he had to walk on dry land. And so here is Peter, and Jesus is walking on the water. He is greater than Moses. He's greater than Elijah. In the scriptures, the only one who walks on the water or moves across the water is God. And so Peter says, if it really is you, tell me to get out of the boat and to do something impossible. And this is not presumption. He's not saying this. Jesus has told him he's going to follow him. I want you to be one of my followers. If I'm going to do that, I want to know if you really are who you say you are. And so Jesus tells him to get out of the boat. Peter does not get out of the boat and sink. Peter gets out of the boat and he starts walking on the water, something that only God can do. And yet Jesus makes that possible for an ordinary human being. And then Peter looks at the water and the wind, and he becomes terrified, and he sinks. Elijah and Peter have both had this just wonderful example of God's power, and they're exhausted by it. Peter is terrified. Elijah goes out into the desert. He just wants to die. He lays down to die. Peter, who was afraid, he was, I don't know what to do. Tell me to get out and walk on the water. Both of them have run out of human steam. Both of them have gotten to the point where they can go no further on their unaided human will. They need a supernatural gift of God's grace. And with Elijah, he's given food to walk through the desert for 40 days, and then he comes into the presence of God. And by the way, when he comes into God's presence, God doesn't say, all right, you've had a really tough time, I'm going to give you a vacation. He says, no, I want you to go and do this. He sends him on a mission. Peter is told to come out of the boat. Peter is told that he will be the rock on which God will build his church. And Peter has to learn to live by God's supernatural grace. Because every time he tries doing it on his own power, he gets things wrong, he runs away, he becomes frightened, he falls. But Jesus is always there to catch him. Peter might not have had the perfect faith to walk on the water, but when he starts sinking, he says, Lord, save me. Lord, save me. And so whether your faith is strong or weak, whether you are feeling down and depressed by the pandemic, whether you feel all alone like Elijah in the desert, Jesus is there for us, and we can call out to him, Lord, save me. Because God's plan for each and every one of us is that we will reign with him in heaven. Jesus wants us to get out of the boat and walk on the water. Now, I got to think that St. Peter was inspired to ask that, because I'm not planning on walking on the water. I think that would be presumption to say, God, tell me to walk on the water. I don't tell God what to do. But if God calls me to do something, he will give me the grace to do it. And the same is true for each and every one of us. God has a plan for each and every one of us, that we will be united in Jesus Christ and we will reign with him in heaven.